They found Alzheimer's in her brain. Full-blown amyloid plaques, the exact same kind they identify in the worst cases of the disease. And she had lived to 104 years old without a single cognitive symptom, not one. I'm 84 years old, and I've spent more time than I would have chosen thinking hard about why the brain fails, partly because I spent 32 years as a registered nurse, and I watched that process happen up close to people I genuinely cared about. But mostly because I come home every single day to a man I have been married to since 1965, who sometimes stands in the kitchen we have cooked in together for 4 decades and doesn't recognize it. Walter has dementia. Mild, the doctors keep telling me, as if that word softens the weight of watching him search for something that used to be right there. It doesn't. So I started reading, really reading, pulling apart the studies, asking the neurologist questions she didn't expect, calling a colleague of mine who spent her entire career in neurology before she retired. I'll call her Margaret, not her real name, and demanding that she explain to me in plain language what the research actually says about who gets to keep their mind and who doesn't. What I found turned a lot of what I thought I knew completely upside down. The woman with the Alzheimer's plaques was not a rare freak case. Brain autopsy studies have found this pattern repeatedly. Cognitively intact centenarians with brains that, by the imaging alone, should have been failing years before they died. Neuroscientists call it cognitive reserve, a backup wiring system, alternative roads that let you route around the damage. And here is what stops me cold every time I sit with this. You don't build cognitive reserve with pills. You don't buy it. You build it through decades of actually using your mind, learning new skills, teaching what you know to someone else, arguing about real ideas, solving problems that have actual consequences. The brain constructs detours, but only if you gave it enough traffic over the years to know where the detours need to go. Margaret told me about one of her patients. I'll call him Harold, a retired civil engineer in his late 80s, whose family had brought him in because they were nervous. He tested remarkably well, almost annoyingly sharp, Margaret said. His imaging showed significant age-related changes that in another person might have already caused real problems. But Harold had spent his entire retirement learning things that frustrated him. Watercolor painting at 70, which he admitted he was genuinely bad at, for 2 full years before anything he put on paper looked like what he intended. Mandarin Chinese at 75. He told Margaret he didn't care whether he ever got good at any of it. He just needed something, he said, that made his brain argue with itself. I keep turning that phrase over. Made his brain argue with itself. Because learning a musical instrument after 60 increases white matter connectivity significantly within just a few months. Bilingual seniors delay dementia symptoms by nearly 5 years compared to monolingual peers. But here's the part that most people miss. You don't have to become fluent in anything. The protection doesn't come from mastery. It comes from the struggle. The frustration is the actual mechanism. Any complex skill that makes you feel slightly incompetent, chess, woodworking, a new language, ballroom dancing, whatever it is that makes you want to quit after 20 minutes, forces your brain to sprout alternative neural pathways. The discomfort is the therapy. You can't buy your way past it, and you can't skip it. And that connects to something else I want to come back to. something Harold told Margaret on a visit that came about a year later. But I'll get there. First, the thing that surprised me the most, because I assumed for most of my career that the brain exercises were doing the heavy lifting, the crossword puzzles, the memory games. Turns out I was only half right, and not the important half. There is a Harvard study that ran for 80 years. They followed the same group of people across their entire adult lives. And what the data kept returning to was this: consistent face-to-face conversation, not texting, not phone calls, not scrolling through what other people are saying. Actual, in-person, back and forth with another human being lights up the brain in a way that no solo activity can match. Mirror neurons firing, the prefrontal cortex fully engaged, emotional processing happening simultaneously. That combination triggers brain regions that no puzzle or app can reach alone. And the flip side is just as stark. Loneliness after 60 shrinks the hippocampus at twice the normal rate of aging. Researchers now classify social isolation as a cognitive risk factor on par with smoking a pack a day. Not a minor inconvenience, a measurable threat. I didn't want to believe that at first. I'm not a person who needs a crowd around me. Never have been. I was the nurse who volunteered for the night shift because it was quieter and I could think clearly. But then I kept thinking about a woman I worked alongside for over 10 years. I'll call her Frances, who retired 2 years before I did and moved out of state to be near her daughter. Beautiful house, everything she had worked for. But her daughter was in a demanding job. The grandchildren were teenagers with their own schedules, and Frances ended up spending most of her days alone. I ran into her at a small nursing conference about 3 years after her move. She seemed older than the time should have made her. Not diminished exactly, but quieter in a way that felt like more than personality. Dimmed. She told me, almost apologetically, that she had gotten out of the habit of talking. I went home from that conference and called someone I had not spoken to properly in months. I have made that a standing practice since. Now, about Harold and what he told Margaret a year after that first screening. She mentioned it almost as an aside, like it was secondary information. But I want to come back to that because it goes to the center of something the research keeps confirming in ways that still surprise me. A few more minutes. Let me talk about sleep, because as a nurse who ran on rotating shifts and black coffee for most of my working life, I was genuinely dismissive about sleep for decades. I thought I was coping fine, and maybe I was then. But what consistent sleep deprivation does to the aging brain, particularly after 60, is not something I can look at calmly now that I understand the mechanism behind it. Cognitively sharp centenarians are not taking melatonin gummies. They are not on sleep supplements of any kind. What they do, almost universally across the studies, is go to bed within 30 minutes of the same time every single night. Not most nights, every night, for decades. That consistency does things that no supplement can replicate. It stabilizes cortisol rhythms, so the stress hormone follows a predictable curve instead of spiking at random hours. It locks growth hormone release into the deep sleep phases where the body actually needs it. and it activates something called the glymphatic system, the brain's own internal cleaning mechanism, which flushes beta-amyloid waste, the toxic protein directly linked to neurodegeneration, at 60% greater efficiency in consistent sleepers than in people with irregular schedules. 60%! Not a marginal benefit, a structural one. Sleep researchers now call regularity the forgotten pillar of brain health, not duration, regularity. I moved my own bedtime to 9:45 about 3 years ago, and I do not shift that window by more than 20 minutes in either direction anymore. Not for company, not for a film I've been looking forward to, not even for David when he visits from Seattle and we're in the middle of a good conversation. Walter actually set this pattern for me by accident. His body still keeps consistent rhythms even when his memory doesn't, and I started matching his schedule. There are nights when that is the closest thing we have to doing something together, and I hold on to that. Now, Harold. What he came back to tell Margaret, almost as an afterthought, was that he had started volunteering at a technical college 2 mornings a week, teaching drafting fundamentals to first-year engineering students. He wanted her to know that having somewhere to be, somewhere real, somewhere a 22-year-old who couldn't read a blueprint was genuinely waiting for him, somewhere his knowledge actually mattered to someone who didn't have it yet, had changed something in him that he couldn't fully put words to. He just felt sharper on those mornings, he said, more himself. That is exactly what the research says should happen. Researchers at Rush University followed over 2,400 older adults for more than 10 years. The people with a strong sense of purpose, a concrete reason to structure their morning, something or someone that required them to plan and show up, had a 30% lower risk of developing dementia, completely independent of wealth, education, or genetic background. In Okinawa, they call it ikigai. In Costa Rica's Blue Zone, it is plan de vida. The words change, but the biology doesn't. When you have somewhere to be that matters, when your presence makes a difference to someone, when your accumulated knowledge is needed by someone who doesn't have it yet, your brain keeps activating the planning and decision-making circuits that go quiet fastest in retirement. Purpose drives daily activation. Absence of purpose lets those circuits atrophy on a schedule. Harold didn't know any of that. He just knew he felt more like himself on the mornings he went in. I think about what I said earlier, about the struggle being the medicine, learning something that makes you want to quit because it isn't coming easily. Purpose is the other side of that coin. Frustration keeps you moving forward. Purpose tells you why it's worth moving at all. You need both. Now let me be practical for a moment because I'm a nurse at heart, and I can't talk about this without getting specific. The Okinawans, the centenarians that researchers keep returning to in the Blue Zone studies, eat roughly 1,800 calories a day and practice what they call hara hachi bu. They stop at 80% full. Not satisfied, not stuffed, 80%. The biological mechanism behind this matters more than the cultural framing. Moderate caloric restriction activates autophagy, your body's built-in cellular cleanup system that clears damaged proteins directly linked to neurodegeneration. Research from Johns Hopkins now shows that even a consistent 14-hour overnight fast can trigger similar protective benefits. You don't have to restrict your calories for life. You can simply stop eating at 7 p.m. and have your first meal at 9 a.m. and get a meaningful share of the same effect. I've done something close to that for years, not originally for this reason. I just never had much appetite late at night. But understanding the mechanism changes how seriously I treat it. The gut piece genuinely caught me off guard, even after 32 years in clinical medicine. Stool samples from cognitively healthy centenarians show gut microbiomes that look like someone 30 years younger, dominated by bacterial strains that produce butyrate, a short-chain fatty acid that crosses the blood-brain barrier and directly reduces neuroinflammation. This microbial diversity doesn't come from the expensive probiotic capsules advertised between segments of daytime television. It comes from decades of eating fermented vegetables, rotating fiber sources week to week, and avoiding unnecessary antibiotic use. 3 different fermented foods per week, something like sauerkraut, something like kimchi, plain kefir, combined with genuinely reducing the ultra-processed meals that systematically starve beneficial gut bacteria. That's the starting point. Cheap, unglamorous, effective. One more thing before I close, and I'll be honest, it's the piece I resisted longest because it challenges something I've believed for most of my life. That you protect yourself by being careful, by not overextending, by knowing your limits and staying inside them. Centenarians don't avoid stress. They never did. Cortisol measurements show their stress hormones return to baseline 40% faster than other people their same age, not because they experience less stress across their lives, but because their recovery speed is faster. And this is a skill you can actually train. Controlled breathing, box breathing, 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out, 4 counts hold, practiced consistently. Brief cold water exposure. Daily movement that raises your heart rate for at least 20 minutes. These things together rewire the vagus nerve response that governs how quickly your body shifts out of fight or flight. You are not trying to eliminate stress from your life. That ship has sailed for all of us. You are training your body to stop carrying it after the moment passes. I started cold showers about 2 years ago. I will not pretend I enjoy them. I do 45 seconds. I think about something that needs to get done that day, and I get out. But there is a particular kind of settling that happens in the following 10 minutes that I couldn't have described before I started doing it. My nervous system quiets in a way that used to take me an hour of sitting still to achieve. And the last thing, the one that never headlines a health article because it sounds too obvious to be worth saying, is movement. Not a gym program, not athletic training. Ordinary, consistent, low-intensity physical activity woven through the whole day. Walking, gardening, carrying groceries, choosing the stairs. Centenarians who maintain sharp cognition maintain steady cerebral blood flow through these small daily habits, delivering oxygen to the prefrontal cortex all day long, rather than in one concentrated burst at the gym. It reduces vascular dementia risk by up to 50%. That number is for people who simply keep moving as a baseline of daily life. I walk 30 minutes every morning, rain or not. I've done it for 15 years since I came out the other side of cancer treatment at 67 and decided that my body had worked too hard to survive to be given anything less than my full attention. Some mornings, Walter puts on his jacket and comes with me, and he's fully present, chatting about something he heard on the radio, pointing out a neighbor's garden, holding my hand without thinking about it. Some mornings he stays at the kitchen table, and by the time I return, he doesn't know I've been gone. I walk either way. Because here's what all of this comes down to. After everything I've read and everything I've lived, the centenarians who keep their minds intact don't have better luck than the rest of us. Many of them don't have better genetics. What they have is a life organized around the things that give the brain reasons to keep working. Genuine human connection, a consistent reason to show up somewhere, sleep that runs on a reliable clock, movement that never fully stops, food that works with the body instead of against it, and a deliberate practice of doing things that are hard enough to produce a little frustration on a regular basis. You don't have to start young. The research is actually clear on this. You can begin building cognitive reserve in your 50s, your 60s, even your 70s. The brain never fully loses its ability to form new connections. That is not wishful thinking. That is what the science shows. I didn't survive cancer at 67 to spend whatever years I have left being passive about the one organ that lets me know I'm still here. And I don't think you're watching this because you want to be passive either. If something I said today landed for you, share it. There is someone in your life who needs to hear at least one of these things, and you probably already know who that person is. Leave me a comment if something pushed back on you, or if you have a question I can actually answer from experience. And if you want more of these conversations, subscribing is how you make sure you don't miss the next one. I'll see you then.